Hello there guys, how are you doing? My name is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and welcome back. So today's conversation is actually inspired by another up-and-coming YouTube channel and a really awesome video through their brand new podcast that they started. And it's a little bit of a piggybacking episode, a little bit of a piggybacking convo, which I like to do every once in a while. Also kind of gives me a reason to bring some attention to another channel or another video, which I like to do. So this conversation was sparked in my head from a YouTube channel called Nintendo Talk, which is a pretty awesome new and up-and-coming channel run by a really cool guy named Patrick. Him and I have interacted before. I think I've even talked about him, answered some Q&A questions, and I even was featured on a video he made where he asked me to be a part of, discussing the Switch in the first 5 or 6 months of its launch. So, really cool channel. Just started a brand new podcast called the Planet Nintendo Podcast. It's kind of a smaller thing right now. It just got started. They just had their first episode, and I checked out all the different videos from that podcast, and one of them, they actually talked about this exact topic, discussing the Virtual Console for the Nintendo Switch. The MIA, where the heck is it, what's going on, Nintendo Virtual Console. And really great conversation, so I'm going to link that video below, by the way. Definitely check out Nintendo Talk, all the other cool guys who are on that podcast, their new episodes of their podcast that they just started and put up episode 1 of, and of course the video where they discuss whether or not we even really need a Virtual Console from Nintendo. So, after hearing that conversation and thinking about the idea of if we need a Virtual Console from Nintendo, it kind of got me thinking just about the Virtual Console as a whole. Because it is this weird thing that we feel like we've been promised and or owed from Nintendo. And they definitely have alluded to it for sure when it comes to the Switch, but we haven't seen it. We haven't heard hide nor hair of it. We've seen some other weird retro things and indie things happening with Nintendo on the Switch, on the eShop. We've heard them talk about what they're doing with this rotating classic games when their paid online service starts next year. We just, at this last Nintendo Direct, saw them showcase this Nintendo arcade game sort of plan that they're going to start doing with weird, like, updated arcade games that they used to have, like Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong and things like that. But the actual Virtual Console, which has been a successful and tried and true staple of Nintendo's consoles for at least the previous 2 generations, which was more than 10 years ago, we've been wondering where this thing is, and does it make sense to see it? Is this something that maybe Nintendo is changing their mind on? Is there a different way they might be doling out this content that a lot of us haven't thought of? So at the end of the day, I feel like we probably will still see the Virtual Console show up at some point. As much as I'm starting to feel like Nintendo maybe doesn't understand how important it is, or understand how much a lot of us actually want the Virtual Console to show up, I feel like the right people involved with making these decisions probably do know those things, and probably have paid attention to, obviously, the amount of money and success they've seen. The Wii, the Wii U, and the 3DS all had some form of Virtual Console, and people love it. We love it. We've all bought so many games through them. I mean, I haven't bought an insane amount of games, but I bought probably 6 or 7 games on my Wii and on my Wii U from the Virtual Console for different platforms, and like, I think 1 or 2 games even on my 3DS. And so, it's a great thing. It's a wonderful service to offer people. Nintendo is the only company that could really get away with something like that because their gaming history goes back so far, through so many generations, through so many of the different relevant eras of gaming and the evolution of gaming. And they have the franchises to back it up that have existed that long as well, that it makes sense for them to offer it. And it makes a lot of us, especially the ones who grew up playing a lot of these games, really happy to have access for just a couple of bucks to download these games and have them, you know, on our consoles, whatever that console happens to be at the time. Now, of course, with the Switch, that changes the game completely, because all of a sudden, if we want to download A Link to the Past, or Super Mario Bros. 3, or some of the weird kitschy games that I'm missing, like weird little niche games like Wizards and Warriors 1 and 2, or Kid Chameleon, or Vector Man, which of course those are even Genesis games, for example, or myriad other things, the Battletoads games. I mean, these kinds of games, to think that we could have access to those and on our Switch where we could take them anywhere is amazing. I mean, we've even seen a taste of that with the 3DS, for example, because you could get a lot of NES and Super NES games on your 3DS, and that was certainly great, and I like playing those games on my 3DS. But the Switch obviously is a little bit different because it's a bigger screen, it's a brighter screen, it's a cooler system. You can also put it on your TV very easily and have it playable both ways. There's so many wins there. And then, of course, you start to get to the idea of, Well, you could get Nintendo 64 games. We're not just talking 8 and 16-bit games here, obviously. We're talking about Nintendo 64 games, which we've never had portable Nintendo 64 games. And then, of course, the big thing that we've all been waiting for, and we've all seen rumors about, and we're all thinking is eventually going to happen, even though we don't really know, GameCube games. So yeah, there's nothing but win there when you take Virtual Console, GameCube games, and the Nintendo Switch. You put that together, you have a recipe for so much success, so much money to be made from Nintendo, so many gamers to be made happy. It would just be awesome. So will we see the Virtual Console at some point? I'm starting to think that Nintendo, like I already alluded to, might not be sure what they're trying to do with it, but I still ultimately want to close my eyes and think, okay, they're not that dumb. They're going to release the Virtual Console eventually. They're just being mum's the word for I don't even know what reason. Actually, let me change that, because I feel like I do know the reason. And many videos ago, many months ago, I sort of touched on this theory, and I'm starting to feel more like it might make sense now than I even did back then. And I feel like it has to do with several things. The Super NES Classic, that coming out in a week from today, actually. That's going to be probably something that Nintendo wants on the market for the period of time that they're selling it, to get these retro SNES games out to people. They're going to bring back the NES Classic. There's a bunch of NES games. Let people buy these separate devices to play the games. Nintendo makes more money that way. And then there's their digital solutions that they're also releasing sometime soon as well, like I talked about. These rotating classic games for their online service, whatever that really turns out to be. It's a little bit mysterious. Nintendo started to clarify it. They've also changed their mind a couple of times, and so I feel like we personally don't really have the hard details to understand it, but there's something they're planning on doing for everyone paying for their online service when that starts, to have access to some sort of limited classic NES or Super NES games or whatever. And then even, like I said, the Nintendo Direct stuff with the classic arcade games. I feel like all of those things combined kind of show us that Nintendo is right now immediately planning on delivering classic Nintendo content on the Switch in a different way than just a straight up simple Virtual Console. I think they're trying like a couple of different business models at once that are all going to just weirdly be connected to the Switch. The SNES Classic, of course, being not connected, but still, they're just trying to get this content out in different ways. They're not yet ready to just make it a blanket, simple thing. Virtual Console, buy and download your games, the end. They're trying to do a bunch of other things. I kind of wish they weren't doing that. I wish they would just make a damned Virtual Console and just release the thing. Again, they have alluded to it with the Switch before, but I just feel like they're doing this weird, quiet, secretive thing like Nintendo likes to do every once in a while. God love them, but they get so frustrating when they do this stuff, which they do it very consistently. So I feel like we're just sort of playing the wait-and-see game. Now, there's another element here that a lot of people haven't thought about. It's probably something it dawned on me maybe 3 weeks ago. I was like, you know, this is happening, so maybe this is Nintendo's plan. And I think it's worth paying attention to because we might just see games show up this way. And what I thought about was the Neo Geo games and the way those have been showing up on the eShop. I'm sure we're all familiar. Neo Geo has been awesome. That company, which is, I can't remember if that's SNK or if that's something else. I don't even remember the company, so forgive me, guys. But Neo Geo games that were on the Neo Geo console back in the day, have been releasing on the eShop just as their own games. There's no Virtual Console that has like a Neo Geo search engine to just find Neo Geo games. Like, they're just taking their games and just throwing them on the eShop for download. It has nothing to do with anything touted as a Virtual Console or a unified app on the Switch's OS that allows you to access classic games. They're right alongside every brand new AAA or indie game or anything else that's being made available on the eShop for the Switch. And so what if we eventually see that happen? What if we never actually truly get a Virtual Console, and what we might see happen is Nintendo, and hopefully other companies like Sega and whatnot, for example, just start to release their games as Nintendo eShop titles. It's so that you don't have to, like, give us a storefront that is Virtual Console that's like, here's NES games, here's Super NES games, here's Genesis, here's Neo Geo. It's literally just whatever we want to just throw up on the eShop is what's going to be available. And if we want to put a 64 game up, if we want to put Ocarina of Time or Wave Race or Pilotwings 64, if we want to put Battletoads or Double Dragon or Super Mario World or whatever, just throw it up on the eShop, and the games are just priced accordingly based on whatever we want to do. And you know, when I think about that, suddenly it's like, you know, that would be fine. I'm like, actually, at the end of the day, I don't know that we necessarily need a Virtual Console. What if Nintendo is slowly planning on doling this out And maybe in 6 months from now, we're going to have just a random smattering of NES, Super NES, and maybe even... Like, I keep bringing up Genesis because I want a lot of Genesis games. I love the freaking Genesis. And maybe we get Genesis games or whatever they decide to do. Nintendo 64, GameCube games. What if that's Nintendo's plan? I kind of think that that's something we need to all consider. I think there's a really good possibility that that's what Nintendo's planning to do. And again, don't forget, guys, it might sound initially like a bummer to be like, oh, well, so Nintendo wouldn't do a virtual console then. That would suck. But would it? Because it's not about where you go on your Switch's OS to download a game. It's about, can I download this game? And if Nintendo just starts throwing these games up, and if the library gets big enough to cover systems that aren't Nintendo like they did before, like TurboGrafx, Neo Geo's already available. Like I said, give me my Genesis and my Master System stuff. Virtual Boy, Game Boy, DS, whatever they want to do, they can just start throwing them up there. And if we have access to the games, I don't really care. Like I said, for me, what's most important is a couple of NES and Super NES games and Genesis games. And yes, Nintendo 64 and GameCube games could become possible. What if they just start putting GameCube games downloadable on the Switch for like 15 bucks or 20 bucks a piece? And as long as the download sizes are semi-minimal, and I think they probably would be. I mean, the console's, 15 years old at this point. That would be fantastic. And then it's like, yeah, you just download the games you want, search by title. You don't have to search by console. Although it would be nice if they ended up going this route, which is just my personal theory. Hopefully you could kind of search for things by the descriptor of the console they're on, but... we would all be pretty keyed into what games we would want to be looking for anyway. I want my Kid Chameleon, I want my Vector Man, and I want my Wizards and Warriors games, and Toe Jam and Earl, like just some really weird, cool, old school games I would just love to download. So I think that's it. That's the thing I wanted to throw out to you guys. I mean, I should mention there is the possibility that none of this happens. What if Nintendo's like, yeah, we're going to focus on our online thing and our rotational classic games. We're going to focus on SNES classics, and we're going to focus on this arcade kind of thing that they're doing from the Nintendo Direct. And maybe they've changed their mind on the virtual console, or maybe it was never a plan, or maybe they just have decided it just doesn't make sense and they're not going to dole it out. We haven't heard them address it in a very long time. But I just don't think that's the case, man. They know there's money to make. They know that it'll make us happy and everyone will win. So whether we get a straight-up virtual console sometime next year, or whether they just start throwing their classic games up on the eShop, I think we're going to see something by the end of 2018. It might be a while away, but I think by the end of next year. And this even includes Star Fox 2. I started to think about this, and I am more sure than ever before that eventually Star Fox 2, they're just going to throw it up on the virtual console. A couple people have talked about it. The day the game was revealed, I discussed it on a video. I was one of the first people I knew that even talked about it. We might eventually see Star Fox 2 just show up on the Switch as a download, and I think that that's going to happen no matter what. Alongside of all these theories I talked about when it comes to the virtual console. Are we going to see it? Are they going to make games downloadable? Are we going to get GameCube games? I think eventually, yes, we'll get all this stuff eventually. But if Nintendo is smart, they'll do it sooner than later. No one cares about the rotational stuff for the online service. No one cares about that. Just give us a virtual console, or just give us these games that we can download on our Switch. So that's it. Pretty interesting conversation. The virtual console is important to discuss. It's something we've all been thinking about and wondering about forever. And Nintendo's typical weird, stubborn silence has had us all guessing and wondering, and I wanted to throw my theories out there about what might be happening if, in fact, we ever see classic games show up on the Switch, which, of course, I think we will. So, what do you guys think? Are you frustrated with the lack of virtual console? Do you have your own theories? Do you agree with my theories? Or do you just have no idea what in the hell Nintendo's doing, like most of us probably feel, and it's just typical thing, we just gotta wait and see whatever Nintendo decides to do whenever they decide to do it. So, tell me what you think below. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.